right, let's get started. First of all, I want to say thank you and welcome for joining us here for the virtual program today. We are going to go over some ground rules to get started. Your mics have been muted on purpose. If you have any program-related questions and you would like to ask us, please do so in the chat, which can be accessed at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Your text will only be seen by panelists and not all attendees, and any inappropriate behavior will result in your removal from this virtual program. We will try to answer the questions as we go along, but there will be time for Q&A after the lesson is over, and a recording of this class will be made available at a later date. Today, we're going to be talking about Unity basics. We're going to learn the basics of Unity software to learn how to make video games, as well as work within the animation to figure out how it is games are made. So to start off with, let's talk about the software. What is Unity? Unity is a code-based software designed specifically to make video games. However, it's actually branched out since then to be able to be made for 3D animated 3D animations, as well as virtual tours for houses, for apartments, things of that nature, as well as for companies wanting to see designs for interiors and things like that before they're actually built. One of the things also to keep in mind with Unity is to understand what your computer needs in order to be able to run it. If you're running at a specific license level, it does actually start to cost money. The current one we're using is for educators. Educators as well as students don't have to pay anything in order to be able to use Unity. The only time you have to start paying to use the software is when you have to actually, try to make a profit off of the games you're making. And that's when Unity wants to, be paid for. And if you're using a Mac, the OS they actually for is about 10.15 and up. And for Windows, it's Windows 10 and up. Can run Unity pretty smoothly. Before we go on, one thing to think about too is that when you download Unity, you're going to be prompted to have multiple variations of the Unity software. Don't ever override your Unity software with another version of Unity. In a workflow environment for Unity, it's important to note that you want to be able to keep every version of Unity that you have. As people who will be working on the project with you in the pipeline, they'll be all working on various Unity softwares. So if you have Unity software 4.0 and then your partner is working on Unity 4.1, you want to make sure that you have Unity 4.1 if they hand off their project to you, because when you take a project that is from Unity, that was worked in Unity 4.1 and bring it to Unity 4.0, you'll have a problem. What will happen is it'll actually erase all of the work that was put into it, and you'll have to be starting over from zero. So be sure that when you're working with Unity to have every single version kept, because if you're working in a group setting and in a pipeline, you want to make sure that none of your stuff gets deleted. It's a little known fact. I've had a few times where that's happened and come up where I tried to work on a project and it completely lost everything. So tip for today for if you don't want to lose your work. We talked a little bit about the purposes and uses. Video games is the main use for Unity. A lot of people prefer, or its original purpose was to make video games for people to play on. However, it's being now used in a more business world using 3D animated software to, showcase buildings, showcase, tutorials about interior design that's coming up. Advertisement, all of these different things are using Unity software for the animation portion of the programming, as opposed to just the actual input and the gaming aspect that Unity offers. Now, something to talk about as well, there are a lot of different key tools, jargon that's going to be brought up every time I'm, going through the actual software with y'all. Scene is basically the level within which the game is being, shown. A scene basically is, a way to think about it is, it's a room. In most video games, you have rooms that you are trying to get out of and going into the next room. Basically think of every time you go through a door, that's a new scene. Anytime the camera changes and you're now in a different area entirely, that is a scene. Most of people, what they do is each Unity game project is just one scene, and they all connect together at the very end of it all. So Basically, if someone says that they're working on a scene, they're working on a room, working on a level. That's probably the best way to think of that word. Scripts, when you are working with any sort of code-based software, lines of code are usually referred to as scripts. Scripting for Unity specifically is under C sharp, sorry. Unreal Engine, however, works under C++. There are some similarities between Unity and Unreal. We'll get into that probably a little later on, but things to note, both of them, if you're working either in Unity or Unreal, they used scripts of code in order to be able to function and make the games work. Lastly, assets is something that's going to be brought up a lot. Assets is basically what populates the scene. What do you put in the game? What is it going to be in the room? Whether it be sprites, animated characters, objects, the like. And when we talk about assets, we want to think about them in the different spaces they occupy. Unity works in both 2D and 3D, whereas when you think of 2D, the assets that are made for that game, they're sprites or pixel-based images that kind of are made to move and animate in order to kind of breathe life into the game using just a flat surface. You can use pixel-based items, such as that you see here with Link. He has been drawn specifically using little pixels, which are square blocks of art, basically colors that have been drawn together to make this character here. You can also do it in vector-based images. If you're going to be doing that, however, that would be probably something you would draw separately in Illustrator and make them into, animated PNGs that you can then later import into the Unity software later. Most of the animations when working in a 2D environment are made outside of Unity and then imported. That way, it's easier for Unity to read the files and understand what's going on with them. And we'll talk a little bit about how you import these images in our demo later, but this is kind of a basic idea for what 2D assets will look like. Now, thinking of it in a 3D environment, it's a little different. We still have Link here, but now he is made up of a lot of what look like triangles, squares, and other little polygons. That's because when working in 3D, basically all models are 3D polygon shapes. They're all made out of a series of triangles and squares. Even the most rounded of images, or a sphere even, it's all just a series of squares and triangles that are kind of layered on top of each other to make it so that it looks like it's a soft and round surface. One thing also to note about Unity's capabilities with 3D is that it does have VR and AR capabilities. VR being virtual reality, it's been one of the new hot things that have been talked about, where there's places you can now go, put on the virtual reality glasses, and you feel you're actually immersed in a 3D environment. Whereas with AR, a good example of that would be augmented reality for Pokemon Go, where you use your phone and it puts a Pokemon that's animated and moving around, and it makes it look like it's in the real world. So the big difference is between VR and AR. VR is you are put into the real into the fake world, whereas AR is the fake world is brought into the real world. But Unity has the ability to do that, and it's definitely something that is worth consideration, especially since VR and AR seems to be where video games have been wanting to go for entertainment purposes. Now, that being said, we are going to kind of switch gears here a little bit, and I'm going to start opening up Unity. But before we get switched on over, were there any questions in the chat?
Not at this time.
All right, so give me one sec here. We're going to get switched on over. All right. So I'm going to open up, as you can see here up in the top corner, I've got what's called Unity Hub. Unity Hub is something that when you download the Unity software, is what populates the area of your desktop. And by double clicking on it, we're going to open it up. And now we have our Unity Hub here with projects is what you'll see first. Off to the side here, you also have Learn. Learn is basically going to show you a whole mess of wonderful videos that can help you get started working in Unity. They're all made by the actual company that makes the software. So they're all, people who are very, familiar with the topics at hand. They also have tutorials that you can go through, all these different fun things that you can look at. And you can actually, they're open source code, which means that you can actually look at the code and see how they went about making all these wonderful little projects for you. And if that's not enough, they actually have a community feature built into the Unity Hub, where you can actually go here if you have any questions, or if you are interested in, talking with people like on the forums, or getting live help from actual experts who work for the Unity company to help you with debugging some of your games and software that you're working on. Lastly, at the bottom here is your installs. Now, we only have a few different installs here, basically because of the fact that we're just mainly here to just show you how Unity works. We're not here to like actually make a game off of this software here at the library. So we only have 2 variations of it. Most people have about, good roughly 9 to 10 different versions of Unity installed. Hence what I talked about earlier, where if you don't have, this part properly, put together, you're going to work in this edition and someone else is going to work in this edition. And if you try to merge together, it'll just crash. So again, keep that in mind. Always have multiple variations of it installed. It's very helpful. But other than that, we're going to go right back to projects here. As you can see, I've had a few different classes ready to go together. We're going to ignore these just a little bit. What I'm going to go here actually is go to New. And when you click New, it's going to option you to either pick 2D, 3D, high definition RP, as well as universal render pipeline, as well as a few other different things that you have here. As we talked earlier, there is the AR and the VR capabilities. Something else to note here as well is that this also offers for you to work as for a mobile game for 2D, as well as mobile for 3D. These ones are nice to have sort of things. However, you can actually go from your 3D and your 2D and reformat it later to be work for mobile 2D and mobile 3D. One of the things to think about when you work in your scene here from this 2D or 3D aspect is that it's going to be automatically formatted to be working on a computer screen, not onto a phone or onto a AR, VR sort of capabilities where the screen is going to be completely different. So things to think about when you're getting ready to make your project is what is it going to be on? What kind of platform are you trying to work with? So on and so forth. But for the purposes of this class, we're going to just do 2D and 3D. There is a whole mess of other things that you can look at and go through. I definitely recommend going through the Learn and the community portions of Unity Hub to get a better idea of what these are. And then we'll go from there. So for this purposes of class, we're just going to select 2D for now. You will want to name your project. Usually when you name the project, you want to pick a name that's, relative to the title, but something also that lets you know what it is overall. So if it's like your game title, so usually what I'll do is game title, and then level 1, then add in, whatever else I need to make sure that it's, very on point for what it's actually supposed to be. But to each their own in that regard. I'm trying to be very organized when it comes to working with games. You might have a different way to organize everything, but to each their own again. One last thing before we actually get into the project is add. So what you can do if you add something from here is you can actually grab work from other people and bring it into your own Unity software, which we talked about earlier. So if you're working in a pipeline and you're logged into the company's Unity license, you can grab other people's work, upload it to this area, bring it back, so on and so forth. Now, I've already gotten some programs opened. Reason being is Unity does take a little while for once you hit open to actually opening the software, and we don't really have that kind of time. So let's go on over here to our 2D class here. Since we've got that pulled up, one other thing that we're going to be putting into the chat is a drive link for a worksheet that basically goes along through some of the basic stuff we're going to cover in this program for today. So if you be so kind, Melinda, to share that with everyone, that'd be great. And while we're getting that pulled up and everyone gets a chance to look at it, are there any questions?
Not at this time.
Okay. So let's take a look at Unity here. So I actually have it already set up in the way that I like to personally work. You can actually move a lot of these different windows around for whatever suits your needs and whatever suits your feelings. I know a lot of people prefer to work with 2 screens whenever they're doing Unity, just so they can have, the game as big as possible so they can see what's going on in the room. Other people like, me, I just like having them kind of like this, where it's only one screen, so I can only really, fit so much into the screen as possible. So making the best of what I have. But as you can see here, this up at the top, this is your scene. This is basically where you're going to be clicking and dragging and moving things around and to actually edit your workspace, as well as make the level in the game. So things to think about too is what is going to be put into your game. So we have, like, right here, I have a little chair that I'm working with, but basically everything that gets edited here will be reflected down here. Down here is the game. This is the actual game that will start playing when you hit the play button, and you'll actually be able to play your game whilst still in Unity and be able to, make edits as you go. One thing to think about too, though, is that if you have hit, one sec here, gotta make sure that Zoom goes away just real quick so I can actually hit the play button. So if you hit play and the game is playing and you start making edits up here and things like that, and then you hit unplay, then as you can see here, the character is gone. So things to note, a lot of people, what they do is they actually make it so that when they hit play, it makes everything a different color. I don't really have that set up for this particular one. You can go change that in your Windows feature here. We'll get more on that later. But basically, make sure that the game is not playing anytime you're doing work on your game. Now, one thing to note too is from the scene as well as from the game, you have different displays, and it has your aspect ratio right here. So we talked a bit earlier about making sure you're aware of whether or not your game is being made for a phone or made for a computer, for a console, things like that. It automatically defaults to 16:9, which is the basic ratio for working in a video game space on a computer. However, you have different variations upon that, as well as a free aspect. Free aspect lets you change this entirely. I'm not going to mess with that real quick for this portion of it. We're just letting you know that this is here, and you can actually make it fit to the aspect you want to for your game. A lot of games who are trying to go for that old school feel, they'll actually make it so that the aspect is more towards those old CRTVs where it's a bit more square than it is a bit more of this long rectangle shape. And again, that's all on you, on what you want your game to be. Another thing to note is we have our hierarchy up here at the top. This is basically where all of our characters and other prefabricated assets are going to go. Things to think about, because like the main camera will always be there. If you delete it, you basically can't play the game. So make sure to never delete it. The tile map is basically where everything is. As you can see here, there's a lot of different things that are kind of out and about. The only thing that you need to worry about is basically what is within this camera right here for whenever you're working. So the lines that come in here, this is already for your aspect. This is basically what's on the screen at all times. You can also technically change what your camera is in terms of the shape of it and how much it can show, especially when you get to actually having a character who needs to run around the screen. there actually is some prefabricated coding that lets the camera follow the player as we go along. However, we're getting ahead of ourselves there. But this is basically where all the assets are going to show and where you're going to put all the coding on. Now, usually I like to have this just a little bit longer right here. This is the inspector. So anytime you click on one of the assets in your hierarchy, you'll see that there is a whole mess of different doodads, knobs, and things that you can turn on this so that it would actually talk to each other via the code. So you can always add components. You can also mess with, various aspects for each portion of it. For the camera right now, we don't really want to touch anything, but inspector is going to show you what everything is and how actually everything works. Good thing to note here is like the chair, for instance. So as you can see here, in the inspector window for the chair, we have, the ability to transform it via just, typing in our coordinates as well as the scale. That way we don't have to, kind of do a lot of guess and check work for, dragging it around using our freehand change tool. You can also change the color of the chair from here. However, usually whenever I'm working with sprites and things like that, I like to do that sort of work in Photoshop. But usually you don't really mess with anything else. One of the things to note, though, is if we add a component, we have a series of prefabricated scripts that are already built into Unity. One of the great things about the Unity software is that a lot of the coding that is added into the game is already there for you to use. So if you wanted to make it something that you would collide with and you couldn't walk past or anything like that, you would give it a box collider 2D. And then what it would now becomes is something that the player can interact with. And as you can see here, it's now got a little green box around it. This is usually referred to as the hitbox. So basically, if the player is going to interact with this chair, even though the chair right here has some empty space here, it doesn't recognize that as empty space. It recognizes it as physical space. So yeah, you can do a lot of interesting things before you even actually have to start writing coding and things like that. Now, I also have down here is our project. Our project is where all of our files, assets, and folders are going to be. So as you can see here, I've got our assets. Let's push this over just a bit so you can see a little bit better. So this is where we keep the artwork. We have our editor, scenes, and scripts. So normally when you open up Unity, it will actually only have a blank folder for assets, basically. And whenever you type in a new folder into it, so we're just going to make this sample. It automatically makes an empty folder, but I'm going to go here real quick. Cool. See if I can find the metadata here. One sec. It's a lot to go through here, so I'm going to pull it up here. So for the assets, and you can see here, that's probably they needed saved, but as you can see here, the folders that we have here, not only do they have the folders here, but they have the .meta version of them, but that's the metadata. So whenever you're working in Unity, it will save not only to the folder, but it also saves it as a separate metadata file so that if anything was to be lost, the metadata will still be there and you can actually salvage it should you need the pieces. So that's what's the project folder area. Also on the side here, as you can see here, there is what's called the console. This basically tells you if anything is wrong with your game. Let's see, what is it currently saying is our problem right now? Oh, it's just sometimes you have to like read through it, and this is basically just telling you that it doesn't like this chair being a box collider right now, because the fact that we've just made it a box collider, but we haven't had any scripting or coding set up in order for it to be able to, understand what it is. So whenever you have something that you've brought into the thing, it does need to actually be able to talk to other aspects of the game, or else the game just doesn't function. Um, Basically, for this particular one, is it's saying it's supposed to be able to collide with something, but there's nothing with which it can collide with. So it's now saying that it's mad about that. Basically, is the long and the short of it. Back to the projects, we have what's called the scripts. And as you can see here, we've got two specific scripts already built in from the project that I pulled up. We have the tile brush and the tile map. If you're ever going to be editing for a script, is you do need to have Visual Studio set up. It's something that you can download for free, and you do have to connect it to Unity in order for it to be able to work. But basically, even though it's a separate software you have to download, it is important to be able to have it, because anything you type and save in here, it automatically links it to Unity so that Unity can continue to be able to function, run, and the like. Let's see here. So that's basically it for what's in the windows that are going to be mainly for what you're going to be using. Do we have any questions about the user interface thus far?
No, we don't.
Okay, totally fine. So before we dive in any further, I'm going to switch on over, and we're going to talk a little bit about the 3D aspect. So if we had opened up a Unity program in 3D, this is basically what you'd be met with. It's a little different. Again, I personally like my layout and setup for it. Again, one thing you can do as well, things to note, is that once you've set up your layout that you want in the preferred way, you actually can go up here to the top right where it says your layout. You can actually save the layout and make a new layout for you to always go to and always be able to reopen at any point in time. So things to note about the 3D version as opposed to the 2D version. So 3D is a little harder for me to maneuver in, at least for me personally. I usually work in a 2D video game platform. 3D has just never been my strongest suit. But as you can see here, if I'm right-clicking, this lets you kind of, change your perspective and kind of look around. Using the scroll wheel lets you zoom in, kind of, figure out where everything is, so on and so forth. Now, let's back up here. And now you'll also notice, let's see if I can find our sun here, there is a shadow here. There is usually, let's just find the sun IO then. Usually there is what is referred to as our sun object that automatically populates it. You can actually move the sun around and it will change the perspective of where the shadow is coming from. As to where it is located right now, I could not tell you. It's one of the, there it is. So you can actually change this, but there's different ways to go about this. So we'll get back to there when we get to there. Let me first talk a bit about what we have here in front of us. So as you can see up in the top corner here, you can change which way you're looking at the piece that you're working on. So you can actually go from either perspective view to isometric view, which lets you kind of get a better grasp of what's going on throughout the entirety of your scene here. Now, the scene is basically the same in 3D as it is in 2D, whereas basically the room or the area that you're working in is within this parameter here. You can extend it if you would like. However, it's not important to make it that much bigger. Usually the way it defaults it to is whatever is the basic aspect ratio, as well as how much memory it can probably handle at the time. Now, if you find yourself getting a little lost and you're like, I can't figure out where I'm at, I've gotten too far away, you can always hit one of the Y, X, Z, and you'll be able to start seeing it. And also, if you find yourself locked in a different way, you can change from isometric to perspective. Oh, seems like I've got locked now. Hilarious. All right, back up. There we go. Now, one of the things here you start noticed is that we have different arrows that you can work with here. So this raises it. This moves it to the left. And this moves it this way. Making sure we get back all the way to where I was before. I don't want to mess with it too much. But as you can see here, there's different ways to edit and mess with this portion here. One thing also to note about your assets is that you're going to be mainly working with Unity, with Maya, as well as like 3D Max, or as well as any other of these kind of like 3D modeling softwares. You can import them easily, just drag and drop assets here. But as you can see, some of the stuff that I had or that I had linked to is gone. The way you can tell that things that you've linked to are gone is they now kind of have this weird pink aura around them. And if you try to click and drag, put them into place, yes, they're there, but they don't have the actual textures that were built into them when they were being worked on in Maya, which is a shame because a lot of work went into that. So things to note is that when you're working in your game, always be sure that your things properly link back to what you were working on previously. So are there any questions thus far when it comes to working in the different spaces that Unity has to offer?
No, not at this time.
Okay. So let's take a look back here. Let's back up here. So I'm going to go back just a bit here. I'm going to go to, let's go back to this one real quick here. I want to talk a little bit about coding. Coding in C# is pretty straightforward as opposed to any other coding I've had in the past. C++ is also pretty easy. One of the things that's great about the Visual Studio as well is I'm gonna basically just write some jargon here. So none of this is actual code, but it's basically just kind of a way to show you that how things can kind of be auto-populated. So as you can see here, as I type something in, it'll guess what I want to use. And I'll just say yes for this. And as you can see, now that I've done that and I've typed public, it now is pulling to everything or showing everything that is in the public space. One thing to note about public versus private whenever you're writing coding is public is going to refer as like to every bit of coding. So everything is going to, talk to each other in that regards. Whereas if you did a private class, it's only going to refer to whatever's in the line of code that you're working on within this piece here of code. So things to note on about for coding is just try and make sure you understand the if-then statements as well as what is going to be talking to each other. So when we say the public class, that's referring to this tile brush, which is basically for this particular game series for 2D is when you're drawing for 2D in a video game setting, a tile brush basically it's the tile, one square of tile that the character can walk on. So that's what we're doing here is we're messing with the code for the tile brush. So by making a public class, it's calling specifically to the tile brush code and how it behaves when it is interacting with everything that is on our scene. So what's nice though, but again, about this, that it automatically knows what you're looking for anytime you start typing in. Let's see here. here we go. So as you can see, as you look down here, there's a lot of different things that it already is able to point out that all these are different points for coding and things of that nature. So really useful tool, really helpful. It helps you as someone who's just starting out with coding to kind of like be able to figure out and populate what it is you need in order to actually make these things function. So I'm going to close that out, and we're not going to save that. We don't want to actually mess anything up. But let us, I just wanted to make sure we talked a little bit about that before we get into the actual game that we have here. So as you can see, this is a game that was pretty much already put together. We have our character already ready to go. If you look up here, we have our hierarchy that has our main camera, we have our character, we have our player, and it's basically ready to go. Now, let's run the game. As you can see, we have our character. Ooh, gotta let him fall down a bit. There he goes. My only complaint about this coding that we ended up with was that he flies a bit too high and stays up a bit too long. But there's a lot of different things you can do. Because one tap of the up button and he's just flying away. There are ways to actually mitigate this, kind of fix it a bit. Basically, you have to just kind of update the gravity or the thrust that's kind of going on whenever you hit the up button. That would basically be, let me pause the game here. That would basically be in our player. So you actually can go over to the inspector window and see all the different things that we have here. Let's see here. Jet speed is set to 200, so he's going to be going pretty fast. Let's actually mess with that real quick. Let's make his max, his jet speed only to about 100. So hit save, and then we're going to play our game again. See how that fixes him real quick. Already it does. Yeah, see, much better. It's a little slower, but he's a bit more controllable now. As I was talking about earlier, there's a lot of knobs you can turn whenever you're making a game, and it's always important to just kind of test and do as much as you can. Oh no, I died. This is rather upsetting. But yeah, there's a lot of different things that you can do as well. So as you saw there, I died, and there was a little animation that came along with it. There's a lot of cool different things you can do animation-wise that you look at and you see here that pretty much everything that is in the game is usually in the screen. However, the animation for that is not on this. There's interesting ways to do that. So let's go in, and you'll see in our artwork, we have under, I believe he's under sprite sheets. Of course not. Let's see here. Debris, there we are. So we have, yeah, I really hate how small these things can be. There we go. Oh, perfect. See if I can give you a better idea of what this looks like. But the idea is basically that we have individual bits of debris here that you can grab and actually put into the coding. If we go back to our player and we look at the explode script here, it actually calls, come back, to our debris animation, which is interesting because, as you can see, it's not at all in this game at all, but it's still able to talk to it via just the player inspector window. And having our script, which is, where is our script? Right over here. So basically all these different scripts that you have off to the side, what you'll end up doing is after you're done writing them, is you'll actually go to the character or the object that you want them to actually, access, and you just click and drag, and then it automatically populates it over here. So since we don't need that extra one, we can actually just delete this. Where is this delete button? Should be able to delete these. Oh, you know what? We can actually just uncheck it, and then now it doesn't actually apply to our character anymore. So with all that being said, were there any questions that kind of came up about how scripts are attached to our players?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Well, for that, we're actually going to move on back to our PowerPoint because I want to show you all some of our resources that we have here. I talked a bit about how currently there's, a switch between, going from Unity to Unreal Engine. Unity is one of the more indie softwares that it's used for making video games. Unreal Engine is usually the one that more of the AAA companies tend to go towards, especially if you're wanting to make a career out of coding and making video games. There is a lovely tutorial about how you can switch over from Unity to Unreal Engine. And it's on the Epic Games web store, which is the company that owns Unreal Engine. And it's basically free to anybody. If you're someone who's more interested in getting into the actual business of video games, this video for here is definitely for you. Unity also, as I said earlier when we were at the hub, Unity's website is full of information, full of different people who are using the software and making games every day. They're definitely one of your best resources in terms of you getting, anything to debug or any of the issues that you might be having with Unity when you're working with it. There's also a bunch of different LinkedIn courses. LinkedIn Learning is something that you with a Plano library card have access to for free. It's something that I use every day whenever I'm trying to learn or trying to build curriculums for these classes that we have here through the public library here. They have Unity 3D lunchtime sessions. It's an ongoing series where the professor basically is constantly adding new courses and new things that you can do when you're trying to use the Unity in a 3D environment. They also have a person who's working on where actually I got a lot of the assets from for this class today, Unity 5 for 2D. It's building an adventure game, as well as they have for how to understand for sprite sheets, things like that. Then there is building a character dialogue system. A lot of most people who make video games really want to tell a story. And if you're someone who wants to tell a story, I highly recommend going through this class and learning how to code, actually making a character dialogue system that plays at certain points in your game. Lastly, as well, digital creation spaces that are available to you, they actually have this software, Unity, as well as Unreal Engine built into them at the digital creation space at both Haggard and Par. You do have to call, to set up an appointment to be able to use the digital creation spaces. However, it's, definitely great to have access to a computer that has all this software available to you. You can, work for as long as you need to, as long as you make the appointment. And that does bring us to our last little bit of questions. If you have any questions, now is the time. I'm going to leave it though on our resources page, so you have a chance to jot it down. If those, if you need more time to jot the information down. So is there any questions?
We don't have any questions at this time.
Okay, well, I'm going to leave it on this. If y'all can think of any last minute questions, feel free to ask. However, if there are no more questions, we really appreciate you coming out. Feel free to leave a comment on the survey that is handed out at the very end of this program. It helps us figure out what we can do to make these programs better and more appealing. Other than that, thank you all for joining us.